Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining Kuiper and VMware for a taste of things to come. I'm Stuart Hall and I'm Director of Kuiper, and for the purposes of this session, I'll be your head chef, barking orders from the kitchen and cooking up a storm. I'm joined today by my colleague, Head of Sales and resident maitre d', Neil Jelly, plus a very special guest from VMware, who is guaranteed to tantalise your taste buds. If that wasn't enough, we'll then be treating you to a cheese and wine tasting with the multi-award-winning wine merchant and tasting house, Lilly. If I may take the opportunity to go through a few housekeeping notes before we get underway. You're all placed on mute with your cameras disabled for the first part of this presentation. At the point of introducing Lilly, we will give the option to unmute your microphone and share your experiences of the wine tasting. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a chat window. Please feel free to put any questions you have into this. We'll come to as many questions as we can at the Q&A part of the session. Now, to whet your appetite, Neil, perhaps you could share with the attendees what's on the menu.
Well, of course, Stuart. Yes, chef. So remember when a menu used to be white clean and it was bad form to look at your phone at the table? These days, QR codes and menu apps are just a really great example of how the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation in our everyday lives. But don't worry, I won't ask you to scan a code or find out what we're going to talk about. Instead, I'm going to take you through our specials. So to start off with, we're going to begin with a couple of tasty data points. Then we'll move on to the main event with Tobias Lilly from VMware. And because we're already sweet enough, we're going to skip pudding and retire straight to the library with Loki for some cheese and wine. So let's wake up your palates with a picture from Stuart's last drinks party and a couple of stats to kick you off.
Thank you, Neil. You're just jealous anyway, mate. As it happens, I need that soup back, so if you can drop it off whenever you can, that'd be great. I think it's fair to say, though, that the dining experience has changed dramatically over the past 12 months, leading to some of the high street restaurant brands entering administration. Carluccio's, Casual Dining Group, and Gourmet Burger Kitchen are just three examples. In the meantime, gourmet meal kit company Gusto has achieved unicorn status with a $1 billion valuation. Who'd have imagined that a year ago? In every industry, we've seen how technology, changing customer needs, and unpredictable global factors are forcing markets and individual businesses to adapt at such speed it can be difficult to keep up, let alone keep your head above water. So our hope today is to provide you with a tasting menu of what we think are some of the finest offerings in the market from one of our strongest partners. Without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Tobias Lilly, Senior Technologist at VMware.
Thank you, Stuart. Much appreciated. I feel like I should enter with a kind of ta-da. Isn't it amazing how it looks like a cloud coming out of that jar as well? I love a theme, actually. So I'm delighted to join you and carry on the kind of food and drink flavor as I share with you what we've witnessed at VMware over the last kind of 12 months, how we're responding to that, and what that might mean for your organizations. So let's start with what that new cloud context looks like. So you did a good job of teeing us up nicely with a couple of examples. And, you know, you're right, the need to digitally transform is really intensified in the last year. If we stay with the kind of drinks example, for example, we can look at Brewdog, maybe. They've been doing some really interesting things over the last 12 months, including, you know, I don't know if anybody saw, but switching their production to creating hand sanitizer, from making beer to making hand sanitizer, and then sharing with everybody what they've learned. Continuing to combine traditional investment models with crowdfunding. They have something called Equity for Punks, which has exceeded $20 million and created 45,000 new investors since September 2020. They've been announcing the creation of 20 new carbon negative bars in lots of different sites, including Shanghai, Bangalore, Frankfurt, and Cleveland, truly becoming multi or global. In each of these, we can start to point to macro changes driving new business decisions, such as the need to raise money and reduce risk. At the same time, each decision requires a degree of technology embedded innovation. And we're seeing this across all industries, actually. The events of 2020 meant that organizations rapidly came to the conclusion that they needed to either embed digital into their products or create new products that are digital. VMware wasn't alone in this regard, actually. And in fact, this kind of continuous evolution has always been part of the VMware DNA, something which I'm going to use to guide us through the next kind of half an hour. So before we start to get into the detail, let's have a quick look at the history of VMware in this context. And businesses have always had a taste for VMware. And like a fine wine, it's getting better with age. Although I'm not sure if VMware was ever worshipped by ancient peoples like wine was. You can look back and mentions of wine can be traced back to Georgia in 6000 BCE, Iran in 5000 BCE, and Sicily in 4000 BCE. What I can say with confidence, though, is that VMware have developed our solutions based on customer taste. So what have the kind of key points in this journey been for VMware and how we've been helping our customers? Here's a few of my favorite vintages. VMware really started as one product, one thing that we sold, and it was called ESX. This piece of software dramatically transformed the industry. So before ESX, each application or operating system that was running in your data center needed its own physical server, an actual box. And so we developed ESX really, back 20 years ago to allow you to run multiple applications on the same physical box. Yeah, simple concept, but massive value. And we have customers today now, pushing 50 to 1, OSs per box potentially. Or if you get down into the container level, which is becoming, even more pervasive, then it could be hundreds running on a single box. As you can imagine, there are huge cost savings on physical hardware, but also things like power and cooling, data center space, all of these things that are really good for the environment, which is important in today's day and age. But then as customers adopted more ESX and had more ESX boxes to set up, they now had more things to manage, okay? And the more things become complex as you have more things to manage. So we ended up making something called Virtual Center that goes in front of this. And this became the management point for all of those different boxes. And at that point, figured we successfully virtualized compute. And that's been the basis of everything that we've done from there. But there were kind of still gaps and still opportunities to virtualize more. We wanted to bring all of these benefits that our customers were getting from compute to the rest of the data center. And so for virtualized networks, we acquired a company called Nicira, which became the NSX portfolio. We then developed a virtualized storage solution called vSAN, fantastic. And then the final piece of the puzzle that's coming in now is really the Kubernetes piece. And so we've embedded that into ESX itself. So we'd fully virtualized the data center at this point. But now we had not just compute to manage, which was already tricky enough, but networks and storage and Kubernetes too. Again, more and more complexity driven by the applications and the desire to do more with applications. So in comes Vrealize, which is where I tend to spend most of my time talking. And Vrealize is there to manage all of it, converting that compute, network, and storage into more of a private cloud. And then later, extending that into a multi-cloud environment. And now we have multi-cloud management across all of it, top to bottom. And so we've got our context and kind of how we got here. What I'm going to start to do next is really try to highlight how we got from, how we get from what's driving business decisions through to IT initiatives, and then onto the technology that that we have to enable for us to be able to deliver the outcomes we want. So although I'm a technologist and sometimes it's fun to talk about technology for because it's interesting and it's innovative, but I really want to try and pull it back to how does it fit with what IT is trying to do and how IT are trying to satisfy the business decisions, which is the most important thing and why the whole data center and cloud exists in the first place. So what's going on at that kind of macro level? Well, if we think about the major drivers behind VMware's innovations today, and those that are, impacting pretty much every organization that we talk to, I'd broadly classify them as these things. So firstly, multi-cloud, and this is going to become more pervasive. Customers that I talk to on a kind of daily basis realize that they need different services from different clouds, whether those are private clouds, public clouds, or a mix of everything. And they need the flexibility to consume services from those different clouds. At the same time, we've got this kind of accelerated digital transformation due to what's happened, with COVID around mass remote working and the need for, ever more contactless and zero touch services too. And if you combine these two factors, what you end up having is a lot of different things to look after, and the rate of innovation keeps bringing more and more technologies into the hands of IT. These are all things that you can't really see or touch anymore as you would in the past as well. So you need to look at managing all of this stuff you just can't see. And I don't mean just people who are working from home that don't want to switch on their cameras. I'm talking about the data, the apps, and infrastructure being outside of where you can physically lay your hands on. So with that as our background, let's think about what that does for the business priorities of an organization. And the answer is, it doesn't really change them, actually. In fact, multi-cloud, digital transformation, and managing all of these complex things that you can't see, all eventually relate back to the timeless business priorities of making money, saving money, and reducing risk. Right? And so, as an example of this, when I'm in a conversation about potentially replatforming some services, it's important to think about how it's going to help the business, not just IT maybe. So you can focus on, saving money for the business by being more efficient with your infrastructure. You can focus on making money by enabling the development of new apps, maybe with new platforms like Kubernetes, for example. Or you can start to look at reducing risk by doubling down on monitoring things like compliance criteria and security. And of course, the business is looking to IT to serve up these capabilities. And this is, this here is IT presenting the cloud on a silver salver. And this is the way everybody expects it to happen, right? It's just by default. So if we think back to business priorities, we see, making money is often influencing these go to cloud decisions that you can see here. Saving money is starting to create demand for more streamlined or intelligent infrastructure. And reducing risk tends to drive all sorts of different compliance projects. And these in turn determine the capabilities that the technology must provide to satisfy these IT initiatives. And the capabilities piece is important in defining what we want and where we want it to sit. And we're in a better position to deliver on the IT initiatives and business priorities without any nasty surprises. Adopting cloud can save money and accelerate time to market, but it really needs to be managed well to avoid some of these massive bills that we hear about that are tricky to interrogate and understand and plan for. A little bit like a restaurateur or a bar manager keeping a handle on their staff, customer turnover and stock. Clouds are complex and the bills are complex too. So here we can bring together all of the components that I talked about so far, before getting into some of the detail on VMware's offerings. So if we start by looking at business priority number one, we'll call it, of making money, the activity that the business is going to undertake potentially in that idea of making money is to expand into new markets potentially, or to increase agility as a business. Then the business will look to IT to set in a task of maybe running a go to cloud or a cloud first initiative. And from this, you'll need certain capabilities to get to cloud as well. And I think of it a little bit like, when you're moving house, You're going to get rid of anything that you don't use anymore, or maybe you have two of them and you only need one. So in the cloud kind of context, this is where a tool like Vrealize Operations can be really, really powerful. You might also want to look at, the topology of how all of your applications are connected through the network, using something like a Vrealize Network Insight. You'll probably also want to, start to build a cloud center of excellence of some kind and get some automation, trying to satisfy those KPIs that you have at this new scale and breadth. For business priority number 2, where we're looking at saving money, the activity there that the business is, wants to engage in is really improving the bottom line of their business. And this usually creates an IT initiative of increasing the efficiency of the infrastructure, doing more with less. I'm sure everybody's heard that. And this could then, maybe lead to some required capabilities such as, okay, let's re-platform. And with something like Vrealize Operations Cloud Management Assessment, which I think we're going to hear about a little bit more, for on-premises, and then right-sizing your reserved instances in the cloud with Cloud Health, we can start to make a real impact on this. And finally, in the business case or the business priority of reducing risk, the third one, we've really got an IT initiative there to monitor and enforce compliance, which leads to capabilities of intelligently implementing things through policy, flagging non-compliance when we see it, and tracking against frameworks such as FIPS and CIS, or maybe just best practice for public cloud services like AWS. All of which Vrealize Operations and Cloud Health Secure State can help with, and what these technologies do. So let's get into a little more detail on how VMware can help to unlock some of that value. Ultimately, where we want to get you with VMware is unlocking the value that exists within your current infrastructure assets. And I've mentioned these a little bit, but at this point, I'd like to introduce our enabling technology for all of this goodness, and that's Vrealize Operations and Cloud Health by VMware. An analogy that I like to use often is when people start to create a cloud infrastructure or a cloud surface, as we call it sometimes, it's like kind of spending years building this beautiful castle, but nobody can actually access it or get to it because it's surrounded by this thick, dense forest. Or I'm just looking at the slide here, we've got a rather lovely vineyard around the castle here, which wouldn't be so bad. But all you can do in that situation when you've got this castle buried in a forest is imagine the value that's inside. And some IT platforms are a little bit like that. Well, Vrealize is really what lets you in. So here's how VROPS and Cloud Health start to unlock some of that value from you. So firstly, VROPS starts to calculate the high watermark of what's being used in your data center. And the way it does this is by plugging into your environment and looking at it for a period of time that you define, and maybe a month is a reasonable amount of time. Even sooner we can get data. And during all of this time that it's plugged into your environment, it's going to track the peaks and the troughs of your environment usage, and then make recommendations, and these can be automatically applied or not. As an example, you might learn through this process and looking at the VROPS dashboard that whilst you've allocated 10 gig of RAM, actually you've never gone beyond 5 in the years that this application or service has been running. So if you're going to re-platform or you're going to move it into a cloud, you know that maybe you only need to give it 5 or 6 gig. And that's a big saving, at scale. And then you've got, Cloud Health, which is one of those kind of awesome acquisitions that VMware is famous for. And really, this one's all about public cloud to start with. And now, if you're a smaller company that's gone straight to the cloud, for example, if you're not careful, your bills can be extortionate. And so what makes Cloud Health so powerful is that you can point it into multiple or a single cloud environment. And the customers that we see with this typically save around 30% of their monthly cloud costs. And obviously, that's at scale can be very, very large, or it can be a small saving depending on how much you're using. But that rate will go as you scale as well. And because Cloud Health plugs directly into the billing APIs of these public clouds in real time, it can actually see what you're running. And in a similar way to VRups on-prem, it can help you to resize and rethink your paid for reserved instances in the cloud potentially to continually save you money. The powerful thing about taking proactive steps like this to try and avoid the kind of cloud tax as we hear is that it gives you, all of these different perspectives. We call them perspectives in the platform. And this allows you to break down your cloud assets by business group potentially, or by project. And this is all automatic and just kind of happens based on tags and whatever data else it can find. And this is really important because, it could be that last month's bill is X, but this month's bill is X plus 10%. And if that's happening, you want to be able to know where that extra spend is coming from, potentially as a business. And why does that matter? Well, in those situations, you can then start to charge back that extra piece or just charge back in general across your business groups. And doing this ties these business units far closer to the understanding the impacts of what they're asking for, which then feeds into those business priorities. And so, anybody that works in IT that has a request from line of business from a service, that they're going to ask for this shape, size, and color. And you could give that straight away, but if you ask a couple more questions, you might find that actually they don't need that. And these tools are a way of automatically doing that for you and showing that you only need to pay for what you're using, really. And so, it helps to take the pressure off of IT and also helps stop IT being seen as just this kind of delivery mechanism. But of course, what always works better than a list of stats is a solid example. So what I'm going to share with you is some insights on one of our customers, and that's Hive. So if anybody's not heard of Hive before, Hive are currently the UK's #1 smart home solutions provider. And given how much time we've all spent at home in the past year, as you can imagine, their infrastructure is going crazy with the sheer volume of data on just how many times young Freddie has turned up the thermostat or the fridge door has been left open. So if we think about the business drivers here, it's interesting to know that the global smart home market is set to reach $137 billion by 2023. And clearly Hive are naturally ambitious to be a leader in that space that's got so much opportunity for growth. So here's what Hive is doing with VMware and what they're achieving. So with such a complex infrastructure, they needed to establish effective monitoring to start with, and thus simplifying operations and reducing the risks of things going wrong, or even worse, things going wrong and nobody noticing until a customer notices and it impacts a customer. They also wanted to be much faster to market with new customer offerings and to get quicker at finding and resolving issues. Greater efficiency in this space means happy customers who cost less to serve. And given that they've built their business on things that are smart, they want to build as much kind of as a service functionality to enable the business to scale quickly. While the market's vast, you want to move fast. In each instance, there's the opportunity to make money, save money, and reduce risk, as we mentioned before. Whatever the size of your infrastructure, you want to make sure that there's no money left on the table and that you have the ability to scale up and scale down at will as things change. And you don't want to have any of those scary bills. In fact, using VMware technologies such as VMC on AWS, which is our service that runs on AWS, and introducing VMware Tanzu Wavefront or Tanzu Observability means that Hive has actually been able to reduce its monthly cloud bill by 25%, all whilst giving developers greater freedom and their customers a better, faster service. I'll drink to that. Given that we're having a bit of fun here, I thought I'd offer you a little something to think about. I don't know if anybody watching has got teenagers or if they're a gamer, but something I was thinking about recently. So being a technologist, the really fun part of my job, you know, apart from looking at wheels of cheese that remind me of Pac-Man, is thinking about, you know, what the future is likely to bring and what's happening now and how it's influencing the future. Gamification in particular is in pretty much everything we do now. My new Aura ring, my smart ring just arrived today, which is, you know, I'm sure going to make sleeping into a fun game for me. And even a walk now with my kids is technical and involves technology because, you know, my kids like to go geocaching. I don't know if anybody's seen that. And it's been making me think about, you know, what's going on with games developers as well, because they're having to develop for these ginormous platforms that just keep growing in these virtual worlds, which are really in the realms of the largest IT enterprise infrastructure customers we've seen. So if you consider the amount of users that are logging into these platforms and the amount of data that they're dealing with in these really popular large games, what we're starting to see is developers are being really clever. And they're starting to do things like putting hooks into their code, maybe for a specific weapon. Let's say you pick up a sword in the game. And every time this weapon is picked up, it's going to send a metric back to IT or back to the monitoring system. Then in IT and as a business, you can start to gather data on the performance of that specific weapon. And the more metrics like this that you can consume, the better and the more informed you're going to be. You know, maybe there's an issue with the code for that weapon, but we haven't seen it yet. With the new developments in things like AI and machine learning as part of that, you can start to look at all of these different metrics and things that you're measuring and monitoring, looking at from all sorts of different sources. And then we can do things like event correlation and anomaly detection. So you might find out that your logged in users count, which you're getting from a separate metric, is dropping dramatically. So you're losing customers on the game. And it's at exactly the same time that lots of people are picking up this weapon, for example. And we know that because we've got those metrics back. So being able to correlate that means you can make a much better business decision to change something. So what happens with X weapon becomes important business information for this games company. And you know how many paying users they're going to have logging in every day. This is business level information rather than just nerdy IT stuff. It's all coming up to the business. And you know, if it can cause teenagers to stop shouting about lag and ping, then that can only be a good thing as well. To bring it back to VMware in the operations space, which is, I suppose, kind of why I'm here, the most interesting thing that we've got going on at the moment is something called Vrealize Ai Cloud. And this is using machine learning and reinforcement learning in particular as part of AI to start to improve performance in the services that run underneath. And we know that AI ops is becoming more of a thing, and we're hearing that more in the industry. And using AI in general is going to allow you to run more intelligent operations in your data centers and in your clouds as well. And given what VMware is doing with Tanzu and AI and ML, there's so much potential and so much growth in this market at the moment. I'd love to hear your ideas about, you know, what you think the applications could be for your business. You know, in fact, I reckon that Kuiper might even be able to help you draw that out with their chef's special. But before I hand over to them, I would just like to say cheers and thank you for your attention on that whistle-stop tour. And over to you, our head chef, Stuart, to tell us what's next on the menu.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Some really useful insights there. Appreciate that. If we think about the cloud operating model of people, process, technology, and continuous improvement, this illustrates to me just how VMware and Kuiper fit together. As valuable as VMware technology is, and we're extremely proud to be a VMware Advanced Business Partner, we know that organisations will use a variety of vendors, and it's our role to help make sure everything plays nicely together. We like to think of it as a perfect pairing, hence why we chose cheese and wine as the theme today. They just go together perfectly. Now, at Kuiper, there's one thing we love more than our cheese and wine, and that's the footy. But we won't talk about West Bromwich Albion's fortunes right now, will we, Neil?
Nice, Stu. Wonder when that would come in. You are right, though. It's in this spirit that we've combined VMware's Cloud Management Assessment Toolkit capabilities with our own knowledge. And this created the Kuiper Infrastructure and Cloud Knowledge Assessment, or KIC, as we like to call it, where regardless of what hardware or software you're using, we can give you the information you need to make a qualified decision. We are platform agnostic when it comes to hardware, and we enjoy strong partnerships with major vendors such as NetApp, Lenovo, and HPE. So rest assured that we have the relevant accreditations and skills. But at the heart of it all, we know that business outcomes are the most important thing. Technology is just the enabler. That's why our assessment puts the emphasis in the right place on helping you make the decisions that support your overall business objectives, not just what's flavour of the month. So using the assessment will help you answer important questions like, do you know what you've got on your hands currently? Are you getting the most out of it? And if not, do you know how to change this in your favour? And then when it's right for you, we can help gently guide you to whatever instance or combination of clouds that will meet your needs and your business objectives. We'll send you more details on this in the follow-up after the event, but do drop us a line if it's something you'd like to talk to us about in the near term.
Nice one. Cheers, Neil. I think with the old kick thing, I think everyone will see what we tried to do there. Thanks for that much, mate. So we're nearly ready for the Q&A. As our maitre d', I think Neil's been round to all of the tables. Puns keep coming. And he's got a handful of questions to answer. So what have you got for us, Neil?
Yeah, so we've got a few tips here. Do I have to share them?
Yes. Okay,
let's just go to the questions. Okay, so I do have a couple of questions in so far, but of course, if you've got any questions from the delegates, please do drop them in the chat box, and we're happy to answer those. The first one I have though is how can I get to cloud quicker? We have a target to achieve, key steps on our roadmap. We'd like to make sure we get things in the right order and don't create extra work for ourselves. So perhaps Stuart, do you want to? That's a good one for our KIC assessment tool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. While we're on the subject, so as mentioned not long ago, we're offering that KIC assessment. So we use that KIC assessment we basically start from ground zero, and what we do is we try and work with you to just gain a really deep understanding of your demands and needs assessment. We work out what your plans are and what your roadmap is for the future. And using Kuiper's expertise, VMware's expertise, regardless of what hardware or software, so completely agnostic, we look to develop a detailed plan of where you are right now, where you want to go, and then how you can get to where you want to go just step by step. So hopefully that answers a bit of the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Stuart. And I just note something in the chat from Chris. So not so much a question, but please do get in touch on KIC. Absolutely, Chris. We'll be in touch with you after the event. So I do have another question here. How do I save money on cloud? We started adopting, but our consumption costs are higher than expected. Hard to interrogate. Tobias, perhaps you'd like to take this one?
So the question was, the costs are more than expected and hard to interrogate. Is that right?
That's what it says. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the companies we bought, I mentioned, was Cloud Health, and so what that does is it starts to break down bills and simplify them. So I don't know if anybody here has ever looked at an AWS bill, but it's just, not that there's anything wrong with AWS, is one of our biggest partners, but they're very, very long, and they've got all sorts of different things because you're consuming lots of different services from different clouds. And it's not just that I'm consuming a VM. I'm consuming a VM, an IP address, all sorts of other things. So the bills get quite complex. And one of the things that Cloud Health does is it starts to let you visualize that from different angles. So you can see, how much are my VMs costing? How much is my overall bill? What's my, trajectory? Is it going to cost me 3 times as much if I keep consuming at this rate in X amount of days? So it gives you all that kind of information to keep you kind of honest. So that really helps with understanding the bills. The other thing of saving money, and I kind of touched on this a little bit through the presentation, but because it's plugging into your bills, your public cloud bills directly, it can see what you've paid for up front and whether you actually needed to pay that much up front or not. and it gives you the chance to go in and rejig all of that. And so whereas you might bought an extra large VM and have that reserved all year, you might only need a small one reserved for 6 months, and it will see that and it will allow you to go and remediate. So like I said, typically we're seeing customers save 20-30% on public cloud bills at all scales as well.
Fantastic, thanks Tobias. We do have a nice short and sweet question here. How can VMware help with modern applications? Perhaps you could answer that again, Tobias.
So I mean, everything that we do is about applications, and it's about running applications. So Kubernetes is probably the topic of choice for that at the moment, and Kubernetes has become the standard. And when I joined VMware 5 years ago, I think some of my colleagues in where I worked before were saying, "Oh, why are you going to VMware? Containers are going to take over." And said, no, don't worry, it's all covered. And got to VMware and absolutely decided to bake Kubernetes into the technology that we already have. So not just developing another Kubernetes platform, but one that still has all the benefits of virtualization and being able to monitor it, and you're already trained because you know how to use vSphere and things like that. So we're helping from that perspective. There's lots of other ways as well. So we brought Pivotal back into the fold relatively recently, and they will set up dojos and will help with our customers to develop applications in modern ways and using things like Spring and modern technologies. And then we have loads of different tools that just kind of help you to modernize your application. So if you've got to modernize an entire application, that can be quite daunting, but you might want to just modernize a small piece of it. And so being able to get the visibility of how that application fits together, and tools like the Vrealize Network Insight can do that, so that when you move a bit or you update just a small bit, the entire thing doesn't fall over. So yeah, hopefully that's a good insight. But I would encourage you to look at the Tanzu portfolio and what we're doing with modern apps in general.
Absolutely fantastic. We do have one final question by the looks of it. We are a HPE house. Are we able to get all the VMware benefits as an OEM offering? Perhaps Stuart, would you like to take that one?
Yep, just have myself on mute again. So yeah, absolutely is the answer to that one. So we work with 2 key server and storage partners. So customers of ours will know we're very much HPE and Lenovo. In the interest of fairness, just want to make sure you know that we believe in both vendors' technology. We don't favour one over the other. Both organisations do a fantastic job, have fantastic solutions. So it's really whatever works for you guys, really. Both offer a superb OEM licensing partnership and work closely with VMware. Really simple licensing structures. Pricing's aggressive, especially if we were to get special agreements for you, and you won't lose any benefit working. So if you buy HPE servers and storage, you buy Lenovo server and storage, you will get the same care, attention, the same licenses bundled in with the discounts that we can get you on the HP and Lenovo. So they really want to wrap us into being that one-stop shop. So you won't have any difference by buying VMware through your next servers and storage purchase through HPE or Lenovo.
Wonderful, thanks, Stu. And thank you everyone for your participation today. We're delighted that we provided you some valuable insights, and we'll follow up on a one-to-one basis with everyone from tomorrow morning. But before then, it's now time for the civilized entry proceedings, or the booze and cheese bit for those who know us well. And it's time to get tasting. So we'll now hand you over to Paul from Loki. You're invited to take yourselves off mute. And if you have a question and don't want to interrupt the actual presentation from Paul, then please feel free to press the yellow raise hand button at the bottom, and Paul will be made aware that you want to speak. So over to you, Paul.
Well, hello, everyone. So thank you for that introduction, Neil. Very kind of you. I'm delighted to be here and representing Loki Wine. We are a small wine merchant cum tasting house, where you can come and try 40 different wines from innovative, technological Italian-made, actually, wine vending machines. But we're here today to celebrate the wonderful pairing that is cheese and wine. So the first thing I'd like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is just to double check you've got 3 wines and 3 cheeses near you. First off, you'll have a white wine which will be called Campouget Viognier. So that's the first one to get out of the fridge. You'll notice on the top of this wine there's a slightly unusual closure. This is called a vinolock. It's a glass closure, so it won't need any kind of corkscrew whatsoever. It should just sort of twist and pull off essentially. And they're very good little closures. These they're quite popular these days, and they're getting more so actually. So we have 3 cheeses and 3 wines. So probably the first thing to do is to get our ducks in a line. So what I would say is that try to line up the Campouget Viognier first. Next up will be the Babich Pinot Noir, and finally we're going to taste the Porteno Malbec. We do also have 3 cheeses, and they're going to match each wine. So the first cheese you're going to have is Taleggio, and you'll be able to spot this one because it should have a slightly kind of orangey coloured rind to it, and a sort of a softish texture. Next up, there'll be the organic Cheddar, which is the one that'll be probably most familiar to many of you, I suppose, if you're familiar with Cheddar. And then finally, we have the blue cheese, which is Cashel Blue from Ireland. So throughout the tasting, we've done a lot of tastings at Loki over lockdown actually, and one of the things that was most exciting for us is that we thought initially, a few of the people around Birmingham were trying to do cheese and wine tastings online, and we'd looked at what they were doing and weren't really sure it was going to sort of take off. And we thought, well, look, we've been doing cheese and wine tastings our own in real life for several years, and they've been very popular. So all of the cheeses you have today are from a wonderful delicatessen cheesemonger called Anderson and Hill, who are just opposite Loki in the original store. So we all have top-end cheeses. And actually the owner of that company, Will Johns, would host with me at Loki Great Western Arcade. And they were very popular. So Phil, the owner of Loki, actually decided to say, well, look, maybe we should try and do this virtually. So we ended up on Zoom for the first session, and we thought, maybe if we sell 40 or 50, it'll be great. And they've ended up selling, I think sometimes the biggest we did was 270 people. Normally it's couples, so it's double that watching. And that we've been selling 3 bottles of wine, 3 paired cheeses all over the country, and with a log on every Saturday night, and they've become very, very popular. So we're quite familiar now with this format. And what we've learned over that period of time is actually if you taste things in a certain order, you get the maximum enjoyment out of your session. So what we tend to recommend is you try the wine, then try a little taste of the cheese, then try the wine again, and it's the very best way of enjoying both. So if we have a little pour of the white wine, one of the things that you can find when you're tasting white wine, they're not always as powerful as reds. And one of the little tricks of the trade, if you pour yourself a little glass of the white wine, just pop your palm on top of the glass like that and give it a really thorough swirl, but keep your palm really close to the top of the glass. And what that's doing is trapping all of the wine's volatile aromas into the glass. Volatile essentially just means the aromas that we can taste or smell. So then once you've done that, bring the wine up to your nose and have a smell. So this is Viognier. It's actually quite an apricot-y, quite almost tropical smelling wine. And what I would say is have a little sip, taste the wine. You'll notice it's not quite as refreshing as something like a Chardonnay or a Sauvignon Blanc. That's because the wine has lower levels of acidity. It's a very gentle textured wine. And one of the great joys about Viognier is if you happen to suffer from acid reflux, for example, actually recommending a wine like Viognier to someone who has that medical problem means that they don't struggle as much. So actually you can tailor fit your wine to people, even if they do struggle sometimes with white wine. So after you've tasted the white, I would certainly say have a little taste the cheese. So it's a very delicate, quite creamy textured cheese. Has a very soft palate or plate, as they might call it. And what they should do is, if you really give it a good sort of not so much chew, but try to get it all over your palate. It's quite a sort of a soft cheese. you'll get loads of flavor there. It's actually a rind washed cheese as well. So it'll have a sort of slightly funky edge to it too. And then the really fun part comes when you try the wine again. So what I'd like you to do then is have another sip of the wine and try to see what happens to the palate. One of the great things that we think happens, generally speaking, with wine and cheese pairings, if you can imagine your palate with zero impact on the outside world, the wine will be just very slightly fruity. Then you have the cheese, which is obviously quite salty. So you can kind of imagine your perception of taste going slightly negative to a sort of salty position. Then you have the wine again. The gulf between those two previous positions is much greater. So your perception of the wine is actually far, far greater. You think the wine is much, much more fruity. So the first cheese, this one is known as Taleggio. It's an Italian rind washed cheese. And it's perfect for this kind of delicate type of wine. You know, it's not a powerhouse, big buttery Chardonnay. It's quite soft, but also relatively delicate. So I have a little life hack for you here. So I know the guys talking today, obviously incredibly knowledgeable about IT. Once you've had your day at work, you've got all your IT work done, and you've come home, or maybe you've been lucky enough to be invited to somebody else's house for dinner and drinks. If you happen to have one of those friends who is terribly cheap with wine, won't spend very much on it, all you have to do is feign hunger. So just pretend you're a little bit peckish, ask for some twiglets or something. Mate, I'm starving. You know, do you have anything to sort of nibble? And they'll think, well, the man is ravenous. Fine, let's give him a snack. But in your head, you're going to know, actually, to make the wine taste better, a little bit of salt goes a very, very long way. So next time you're at your friend's homes and you ask for something slightly salty, they may know. So do it outside of this group, please, if you don't mind. So I hope you enjoyed this first pairing. It's a delightful wine. It's Chateau Campouget. They were founded in something like 1700. They're a very, very old chateau based in the Costières de Nîmes region in the south of France. A lot of people are very passionate about French wine, myself included, and a lot of the stuff I have in my cellar is French. But the other areas in the world that do Viognier very, very well are South Africa and South Australia. So don't think that France is the only place that does Viognier. It actually was a grape variety that very nearly went extinct, were it not for the Northern Rhone region. The grape actually might have gone extinct, but it was only because they had the Australian flying winemakers, who, of course, being in the southern hemisphere, could do a vintage down there, fly up to the northern hemisphere and still capture the vintage there. So they had double the practice, essentially, in terms of learning how to grow and make wine. And they discovered that Viognier was actually quite well suited to warm climates. So the naturally low acidity didn't really require masses of cool temperatures. So actually you can grow this grape variety in a warm climate like Australia, and actually it produces beautiful wine. So they learned a lot about how the grape varieties are intensely suited to where they grow. And obviously if you've developed a grape variety that's developed in a particular climate for a very, very long time, it's kind of evolved with that climate. With any kind of cheese and wine tasting and food and wine tasting for that matter, one of the things I'd always like to suggest, if you ever have a glass of wine from a country or a region that you're not necessarily very familiar with, and you're just having it on its own. I mean, let's say, for example, we chose a Chianti or something. It's actually quite a difficult wine to taste on its own. It's quite grippy and tannin. They're not the most beguiling wines on their own because they were born to go with food. And a lot of Italian wines are a bit like this. So my rule of thumb here would be to say, if you don't initially like it, and it's from a country that you know has a very famous food heritage, let's say France or Spain or Italy, for example, give it another go with food. Because sometimes you might find that, let's say we were having spaghetti bolognese or something. You've got a glass of Chianti. You put these two side by side and something clicks and the world is just a better place all of a sudden. And it's one of those things that sometimes the food and wine in a particular country just really evolve together to match perfectly. So, whenever you're trying to pair fine food and wine, it's often a way to go to kind of actually pair the particular cuisine with the country that you're eating. So I think unless you're giving yourself a really large glass of the first wine, it's probably better to sort of move on to the next one. So the next wine is going to go with a lovely organic cheddar. It's not my place to sort of belittle supermarket cheese, but you know, we all buy cheese from supermarkets, most of us. But having a cheesemonger immediately opposite where I work, I was exposed to some quite nice cheese, and it's surprising because after you taste a really well-made cheddar, and then you taste David Stowe extra mature or something of that ilk, you then go, okay, now I know what cheddar actually tastes like or can taste like at the sort of top end. And it's a great deal better. So I apologize profusely if this tasting ends up ruining you for supermarket cheese, because it has done for quite a lot of our customers. So I'm sorry about that. But you do have a really wonderful cheddar to go with the next wine. So if you can pour yourself a glass of the next one is Babich Pinot Noir. So this is actually from New Zealand. Quick question there. You meant to clear the palate between wines. Yes. So good question. So in trade tastings, we don't drink water in between tasting red wine and white wine. And certainly we don't rinse the glass out with water. So a lot of people think this is de rigueur, is the kind of standard procedure, but actually water to wine actually dilutes whatever was in your glass before more and more damagingly than another glass of wine will. So the best thing to do with wine normally is just to empty out the glass as best you can, or ideally drink it or taste it. The wine's quite nice, so I'd hope that you drink it. And then you won't get the dilution factor into the following wine, which is actually more damaging than a tiny drop of the previous wine generally. If you do move between white and red, then feel free to use a separate glass. That's what I would normally do. Certainly, obviously, that's desperately important if you have red wine to white wine, because obviously you'll end up with some kind of mad rosé that you won't expect. And it certainly won't be what the winemaker was intending anyway. But good question. Thank you for that. So this red wine, this is from New Zealand. So New Zealand and Pinot Noir have a little bit of a love story going on, really. So people don't really realize, I don't think, in the general populace, that New Zealand is famous for more than just Sauvignon Blanc. Obviously, we know very well that they do Marlboro Sauvignon Blanc, and they are fantastic. But where you can grow Sauvignon Blanc, you need a relatively cool climate. And actually, Pinot Noir is the most silky, the most ethereal, and the most pretty of all of the red grapes. So you may have heard of Malbec and Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, but all of these pale in comparison to Pinot Noir in terms of finesse. So if you're looking, if you could imagine the slickest IT system you can ever imagine, then they'd be drinking Pinot Noir without a doubt. I mean, it's that kind of level of grape. It's one of the most beautiful grape varieties on earth. It's a very thin-skinned berry. As a grape variety, which is why it's so pale in the glass. So all of the tannin, which is a compound that grips your gums and makes them kind of dry out slightly, makes you have that kind of perception of power in a red wine, is all in the skin of the grape. So if you have very little color and very little tannin, they're all found in the grape skin. So with the thin skin, you end up with a very pale, very delicate, very silky wine. And New Zealand really makes three different styles of Pinot Noir. They make Marlboro Pinot Noir, which is the one we're drinking today from Marlboro. This tends to be the most pristine and the most kind of pure flavor of Pinot Noir that they produce. They're normally not particularly savory and normally very pale in the glass. The two other styles are from Central Otago, so that's in the South Island of New Zealand. That tends to be much darker in fruit and more robust, and sometimes actually showing black fruit as well as red fruit. Pinot Noir typically will give you strawberry, cranberry, and raspberry. Those are kind of classic aromas of Pinot Noir. And then you had the final one, which is Marlboro. So that's actually the southernmost region in the North Island of New Zealand. And they are the oldest vines in New Zealand. So they tend to produce the most Burgundian style of wine. So named after the region Burgundy in France, it makes the most expensive Pinot Noir in the world. And actually, they tend to be slightly more savoury in style from Martinborough. So they're quite distinct styles. If I had to pick sort of one trait from New Zealand wine that actually really is a sort of telltale sign, it's that sort of pristine purity of fruit. They have incredible clarity on the palate. They're not muddied at all. They're always very, very pure. And you can kind of know what you're getting with New Zealand. You know, they're not trying to be too left field. They're always quite reliable. And they started from a very initial point in their winemaking history to aim for premium. You know, we're going to make a good wine to start with, and we're going to charge a little bit more for it. And as a result, you know, the perception and the market value of New Zealand wines is far higher than somewhere, even at the basic level, than somewhere like Italy. So, an interesting country. The one thing I'd say with Pinot Noir, it does struggle a little bit with something, with one particular aspect of wine making, which is where you oak a wine. So a lot of wines are matured in oak barrels to give them almost a little bit of polish. So if you imagine putting a really rough gemstone into a polishing machine, it'll come out looking absolutely sort of polished and rounded and soft, sort of looking to the eye. And almost the same thing happens with wine. The tannins end up softening up if you age it in a barrel for a year and a half. The problem being, we know that Pinot Noir is a very delicate grape variety. It's quite sort of restrained. So if you then put 100% new oak barrel and age it in Pinot Noir into that barrel, you can actually almost end up over egging the wine. It's almost, if you imagined, you know, if you dressed up the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and all of the dwarves were dressed in 6-foot fur coats, they'd look a little bit overdressed because they weren't fitting correctly. And the same thing happens to Pinot Noir if you put 100% new oak for the maturation process. Normally you'd use a little bit less just to kind of be a bit more respectful of the grape variety. To date is probably, for me, the best example of any grape variety to show an aspect of where it's from. There's a French word called terroir. It means all of the aspects about where the wine is grown, the grape is grown, to influence how the wine is flavored. You know, so imagine if you could taste the difference between Huawei and Samsung or something. And it'd be very, very obvious when you start to sort of pick them up and use them. Well, the same thing happens with Pinot Noir. If you have a Burgundy compared to an American Pinot Noir compared to a New Zealand wine, they are totally different. Although they'll have similarities, perhaps they're doing the same job, but they each have their own individual character. So, you know, I suppose there is some synergy in that between what IT companies do when they offer the same sort of products or offerings, but they'll each have their own particular niche, and that's kind of the same with Pinot Noir. So we had a question about glassware. We actually did a tasting in Loki about glassware, specifically with Pinot Noir, with a company, an Austrian company called Riedel, who are one of the market leaders for glassware. Very, very beautiful glassware. And one of the family members of this company, one of the owners, gave us the same Pinot Noir out of 2 glasses. One of them was designed specifically for Pinot Noir, and one of them was designed for Cabernet Sauvignon. And he said, we've done a lot of research on this, and we know that your tongue, what we might sort of overall call our palate, detects different things in different areas of the tongue. So if you design a glass to channel what you want to taste more of from that wine to the areas of the tongue that you're going to enjoy the most, you'll get the best out of your wine. So he got us to try these 2 wines, one from, you know, a very entry-level glass really, and one from his brand new Pinot Noir glass. And it was absolutely chalk and cheese because his Pinot Noir glass gave us a lot more perception of fruit, because the first thing that hits you, because of the way the glass was channeled, came all over the fruit perception area of the tongue rather than the bit that detects bitterness. So you literally get a better perception of wine from the right glass. When you get to kind of fairly nerdy wine professionals like me, and I've been in the trade for, I guess, pushing 10, no, probably more than that, almost 15 years now. We'll each have different glasses for different grape varieties. And And it really does make quite a big difference. So if you're spending more than, say, £20 on a bottle of wine, the glass selection actually does play a part, as does temperature. And we'll talk about temperature a tiny bit more with the next wine. I hope you're all enjoying the Pinot Noir. I'm very happy to have your questions via the chat, or if you want to sort of pop up and ask me a question, that's fine too. But if you've had a little taste of that Pinot Noir, we can move on to the. Well, I should talk probably briefly about the cheese match as well. So the cheese match here, what we're looking for is the slight saltiness in the cheddar. Now, Pinot Noir being quite delicate in fruit, if you have Pinot Noir, then the cheddar, then the Pinot Noir again, what you'll find is that the Pinot Noir tastes a lot more fruity after the cheese. So with any kind of cheese and wine pairing, you always have to try and make one or the other the key thing. So with the first match, really, the sort of the star of the show for me was the Viognier. With the second pairing, the star was really the cheese, because the cheese was much more powerful and pungent than the Pinot Noir. But it worked to amplify the flavors in the Pinot Noir. So that's one of the sort of joys of cheese and wine pairing. So with the next wine then, what we'll do is pour ourselves a little glass. So we've got the Porteno Malbec from Argentina. And we're doing this with an Irish cheese, a blue cheese called Cashel Blue, which Will describes this, my sort of cheese counterpart, he describes it as more of a beginner's blue. So I know blue cheese is, it has some fans and it has some people who can't go near it. It varies a lot in terms of the intensity and how much veining of the blue mold it has through it. But this one is particularly creamy and quite gentle. So one of the things that certainly it may be worth doing here, when you do go in for a little taste of the cheese, just try a little bit to start with to see if you can familiarize yourself with the flavor. If you have a giant bite of blue cheese, you will know about it quite quickly, because it's quite a strong flavor. But as usual, I would always recommend a little bit of wine, a little bit of cheese, a little bit of wine. That's how we would normally play it. So a little bit about Porteno Malbec. So this is a wine made in Argentina. It's from Mendoza region. And actually the Bodegas Norton, where this was made, was actually founded by an Englishman, a traveling engineer, who was absolutely besotted with this place, found it a very beguiling place to make wine, and built his own winery there. And he was one of the first people to plant vines in a sub-region of Mendoza, called Luján de Cuyo. So you're over 1,000 meters up in altitude here. And I imagine nobody of you will probably know this, but altitude is a hugely important factor in Argentina, because it's really naturally a desert. There's no God-given right why they should be growing grapes there at all, because it's a desert. There's no water. So to get any kind of grapes growing there, what they actually have to do is actually have a huge amount of irrigation in order to grow the grapes. But the altitude part is actually a fantastic element. So a little tidbit of information here. So the further up you go in altitude, the more the UV flips. So you have UVA and UVB. So for those of you who are mountaineers or have been into high altitude skiing, you actually have to be quite careful about getting sunburn when you go out to really high altitudes. And obviously the grapes that grow at these really, really high altitudes, I mean, Argentina makes grapes at 3,200 meters. So they go really a long way up to the Salta region in Cafayate. But what the grape varieties actually do themselves, the vines, to protect themselves from this quite damaging UV, is to actually produce a little bit extra pigment in the berry. They have thicker skins, darker skins. So the higher up you go in altitude in Argentina, the darker your Malbec will become. But the skins also give us fragrance and aromatics. So you have some people like Colomé, for example, one of the really famous producers really high up. They actually decided to not oak their wine at all, which is quite unusual for Argentinian Malbec. A lot of times they are oaked, and this one will probably have a little bit of oak, but not masses. And that was quite a bold thing. It's a really outlier thing to do, because generally speaking, everyone expects Malbec to be relatively similar. It's become so popular in the UK market, certainly, because it's very predictable. You buy a bottle of Malbec, you know what you're getting, you know what to expect. But Colomé decided, well, look, we've tasted the wine here. it's so fragrant, it's so vibrant that I actually don't think it even needs oak. And that's for a wine that at that point was selling for probably 30, 35, 36 pounds a bottle. Was quite a bold move. So Argentina is a hotbed of really quite dynamic winemakers. And actually they're a bit of a hotbed of female winemakers as well. So this is a growing trend in the wine industry. There's a lot of female winemakers now who are really making some big waves. So as an industry, we're very proud of that. Really, we're quite a diverse community. Certainly Loki, for example, I think it's 4 guys and 14 girls, women. So very sort of switched up really compared to the old days. So that's good. So the Casual Blue itself, it's quite rich. It's definitely going to coat your mouth with a sort of a layer of fat. Typically speaking, Malbecs are quite famous for being quite high in tannin, so that kind of grippiness we talked about earlier. But what you'll find is that whenever you have something that coats your palate first before you have a high tannin wine, you don't tend to detect the same level of tannin. It makes the wine taste softer. So this is why, if you're ever lucky enough to go to an Argentinian steakhouse, for example, and you have a nice bottle of Argentinian Malbec, the wine tastes absolutely amazing with the steak. Apologies for vegans on the call. I'm not sure what the sort of steak equivalent, nut roast perhaps. It doesn't quite work the same with this analogy, but the tannin level actually latches onto protein. It literally latches onto you as an animal. So when you're eating a steak, it latches onto the protein that you're eating as well as you. So your perception of the tannin in the wine is lessened, which is why the wine tastes absolutely fantastic with the steak. But if, like me, you get a tiny bit overexcited when you're having the steak, polish it off quite quickly, but then you've still got some wine left. You try the wine again, it's never quite as good. So, my own personal rule of thumb here is that really you should try to kind of try to smash down as much of the wine as you can with the main course, really, because actually it'll be the best flavor profile from the wine. So I'd be very interested to see. I mean, I don't know whether anyone wants to sort of pop on the chat and answer this question, but I'd love to get your opinion on what you think was the best match here, because these 3 are all quite nice matches and lovely wines, I think. So what do you think, guys? Do you want to have a little talk? Malbec and Beginner Blue. Great.
Yeah. So Stuart here. Yeah, I think that Malbec. I'm not a blue cheese fan, but that I can see why your colleague called it the Beginner Blue. But when you said smash down more wine, I bet that's no problem. We can do that. Absolutely, that's the excuse.
Well, I mean, if you're going out for a steak, it should be a bit of a celebration, And we've all been stuck away from restaurants for such a long time. I think people should go back and enjoy themselves to the max if they can, because a lot of these restaurants, I've spoken to a lot of the guys who work in the restaurants around here, and they're all desperate to start going again. So I think if we have some enthusiastic imbibers in the first couple of weeks, that's no bad thing. So I should also open the floor to any of the attendees, or even hosts, should you wish. If you have any questions on wine, I have studied towards the Master of Wine qualification. So that's the top level of wine qualification in the UK. So if there are any questions at all, please do throw them at me. I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have. Lovely pairing. Second with the cheddar. Oh yeah. It's a lovely pairing. It's a lovely pairing. And we do sometimes sort of try to be a bit wary about putting something as familiar as a cheddar on. But when you actually taste the cheddars that we put on, they're not like the cheddars that most people have had. And that's really the kind of the great joy of this. So we won't be afraid to put these kind of things on. Yeah. So yeah, any other questions for me?
Hey, Paul.
Hi.
So with when you open a bottle of wine, is there any time limit to having to drink the whole lot? Now, you might say that you just drink it in one go, but say if you decided to have a glass, put it away, is there any sort of limit to when that wine should be used once it's been opened?
So well, thank you for the question. Really good question. So what I would say for that is, if you can imagine cutting open a fresh apple and leaving it on the side, what tends to happen to the apple? It slowly goes brown, doesn't it? It oxidizes. So absolutely the same thing will happen to wine. So what I would say is that, sort of generally speaking, just try and get the bottle of wine consumed within 3 days. There are a number of different tools you can use to remove the oxygen from the bottle of wine. So you can have a blanket system where you buy a canister of something like argon or nitrogen, spray it into the bottle of wine, which will displace the oxygen that would otherwise damage the wine, and then you can pop the cork back in. That will keep it for a day or so a bit better. You can also have a vacuum system, and these are readily available, which will basically just suck the oxygen out of the bottle, and then you can put a little cork stopper on top, and that'll keep it as well. I mean, forgive me for being somewhat of a hedonist here, but if you are in a sort of a couple situation and you've got a bottle of wine, if it does take you 3 days to drink a single bottle of wine, you just need to work harder, I think. I mean, you must, or buy better wine that you want to drink more of. So 3 days with one bottle of wine is quite a long time for the wine to kind of try and keep its presence. So I'd always encourage to try and get the best out of the wine, and leaving it too long, you kind of lose a bit of the wine's quality, really. Fantastic. I hope that answers the question.
Work harder at drinking wine, we must, I think, is the phrase. Just going to quickly read out Tim Hill. I think from all of us, he sends his apologies, and his neighbours using a disc cutter, and he says he doesn't have a question, but he just wanted to thank you, Paul, for your time and the information about the wines. So it was a very nice experience. So maybe Tim can have a few more glasses and bang on the wall at some point later and get his own back. But no, it's been absolutely fantastic. I think, is there any more questions that anyone's got?
I've got one from Tim here. How long would you leave a bottle of wine to breathe before starting to drink it? So very much depends on the quality level of wine. So a wonderful experiment you can do with wine and breathability is to open a bottle of, say, £5 bottle of wine, and then something that may be 20 or approaching 20. And open both wines. If you can get the same grape variety from the same country, it's even better because it's a bit more sort of empirically fair. But what you tend to find is that the £5 wines are designed to be incredibly flamboyant, straight out of the bottle. They're really hugely enjoyable. But then if you leave them for half an hour in the glass, they'll die a death because they're not really designed to kind of have that longevity to them. They're not, it's kind of like buying a Corsa and expecting it to last as long as a Jaguar. It's not going to, because it's not been designed to. Conversely, a really expensive wine will often be a little bit subdued and a bit kind of restrained to start with. But then you give it 20, 30 minutes, it'll start to kind of unfurl, and it'll be the most beguiling thing in the world. And that's by design. So really, the more expensive the wine, the better your chance of needing it to breathe for longer is. The one sort of rule of thumb with that, though, if you have a very delicate wine like a Pinot Noir, it'll need less time than something heavy like a Cabernet Sauvignon. And if you have a very, very mature wine, it won't need decanting anywhere near as long, because through the cork there'll always be a tiny bit of oxygen ingress, so you'll age the wine slightly. So with an old wine, you would of course decant off from the bottle because there might be a little bit of sediment. A lot of wines will throw us over time. You'll pour that out, discard the sediment, and then taste the wine immediately, because actually you might find that the wine is absolutely ready to go. I mean, a great example of this, I had a tasting with one of our customers. He was quite a mature chap. His father had owned a wine merchant many, many years ago. And he brought a 1961 bottle of wine to Loki and said, look, I've got no one to drink this with. I want to share this with you, and we'll raise a glass to my old man. So we opened it, and he was very taken aback, because I said, look, this is 1961. You really want to drink this within about 15 minutes between the three of us. And he was quite shocked, but But by the time sort of 14 minutes kicked in, he smelt the wine and said, "I'm so glad you said that because it's died a death, hasn't it?" I was like, "Absolutely right, because it's had its last kind of peacock's tail of a moment, and then it's gone." But we managed to get it down. We worked hard.
That's brilliant anecdotes. Well, like I'm not a wine drinker myself, but the stories have certainly made me want to become more of a wine drinker.
The wine for everyone, I promise.
Absolutely. So I think we've got lots of messages of thanks on the chat, and I think probably a good time to say thank you very much, Paul. I'll come on the camera, back on camera, if anyone wants to see me. So yeah, thanks to everyone. I hope you've all had a wonderful time with us. I can certainly say it's been fantastic to spend time in your company, and hope you've had plenty to take away today. I hope for a few of you, if you're going to carry on drinking, you've booked the day off tomorrow. Thanks to everyone for attending, to Tobias for his valuable VMware insights, and also again to Paul for the excellent experience. Thank you so much for that. We have worked hard as Kuiper to create something that is just better than your average webinar, and this emphasises how we want to create better outcomes for you, and align strongly with what we're about at Kuiper. We're dedicated to universally embracing IT solutions. That's who we are, that's what we do, and we like to act as a broadliner for every aspect of IT. So rather than me tell you about it, I'm leaving you with a few quotes on the screen now from some of our valuable customers. I just feel it highlights, in our customers' words, not just what we do, but how we do it. So we just love the opportunity to carry on working with you. And for those of us who haven't worked with us yet, we'd really love the opportunity to do the same for you. So if there's anything at all that the team or I can do for you, please do get in touch via the email address that should be on the screen now, or please contact your account manager directly. Once again, really appreciate you being on here. It's been an absolute pleasure to be in your company. All that's left for me to do is wish you a happy rest of your evening. Take care, and we hope to see you soon.